Good morning. Please welcome your 65th Annual Youth Governor, Jackson Hasty.
Thank you, Tommy. Questions?
Governor Hasty.
Okay,
I have
Elaine.
a question. All around the country, teachers are striking. How do you intend to ensure that Tennessee teachers are adequately compensated for their hard work, considering there's only been a 2% increase in pay over the last decade?
In an ideal world, I think the teaching job would be a much more competitive position. Under our current tax structure, I think the best we can do is try to increase retention by making more than modest increases in teacher pay. There is a clause in the budget right now that is allocated towards educational advancements. I think teacher pay is probably the most important part of that, and that's where I think we're going to put a lot of our funds for that section.
Thank you.
Governor Hasty.
You.
All right. I noticed you endorsed an implementation of a charter cap, and within the bill, it recognizes a potentially risky educational endeavor. What does that mean?
What that means is that charter schools, if they fail, can shut down and leave the students who used to go there sort of in the wind. That's what we consider to be a risky educational endeavor.
Governor Hasty.
Yes.
There are numerous ideas on how to improve public schools in Tennessee. What steps do you feel are most important to begin the improvements?
I think, again, increasing teacher pay is helpful because that ensures that teachers will stay where they are, because we have a huge problem with turnover where teachers will not stay for 5 years. They'll stay for a year and a half and then move on to another job that maybe pays better. So I think teacher retention, because if a teacher stays in a school, then they get institutional knowledge and they get to know the students better, and just the quality of education with teachers that stay longer is infinitely better.
Governor Hasty.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on charter and magnet schools? Should those be expanded?
Magnet schools, I think, are one thing. I'm personally very against charter schools because I don't think it's right for a company to gamble with people's education. That said, I do think that there are some instances where charter schools like KIPP Academy, for example, has shown great results in their different structure, and it's good to have other educational ideas be tested. Now, the point of that charter cap was to make sure that these ideas are experimental and that they're then adopted as the mainstream if they're successful, and not that these are to replace neighborhood schools. I don't believe that charter schools should ever try to replace neighborhood schools. Yes.
How do you plan on addressing tuition equality for undocumented immigrants who are raised in Tennessee?
I believe that there was a bill for allowing undocumented immigrants to receive in-state tuition the same way, and we're supporting that bill, and we hope it passes because they have done the same work as any other student in Tennessee, and they deserve Tennessee Promise and in-state tuition the same way we do.
Hasty.
Okay.
So far, what bill has impressed you the most, and how is it going to help revenue for the state?
It's not going to help revenue for the state. It's going to help with civic engagement, and that is the automatic voter registration bill in the Red Senate. I think having automatic voter registration is essential because we 50th out of 50 for voter registration, and that's in part due to the fact that the state is making it harder for people to register to vote and harder for people to vote. And allowing automatic registration just gives people the opportunity to vote, and I think if everyone can vote, then we can solve a lot of problems from there.
Governor Hasty.
Yes, back middle.
Okay, there have been many disagreements over health care in legislature. Accepting those disagreements, what steps do you propose to improve the health care for as many Tennesseans as possible without raising taxes or straining our budget?
So one thing that we can do is expand Medicaid. There's a amount of federal money, which is $3.5 billion for people who can't afford health insurance but don't currently qualify for TennCare to then now be able to actually receive that TennCare. And many other states have done this, and they've all seen large improvements. And 95% of this money comes from the federal government, so no strain on the budget. And local hospitals had agreed to pay the other 5% because they would rather have paying customers, and they would rather have people get treatment than decide not to because they can't afford it. So I think that's the most important thing, and we'll be introducing that bill later today.
Governor Hasty. Governor Hasty.
On the end.
What are your views on someone being able to join the military but not being able to buy alcohol? Would you be in favor of lowering the drinking age in Tennessee?
Under federal law, we lose a lot of money for highway funds if we lower the drinking age to 18. And because our roads are in such dire need of repair, and thankfully because of the Improve Act, we're able to work on fixing them. Even if I personally think that 18-year-olds should be able to buy alcohol, that would not be wise for our state to do because we would lose a lot of federal money.
Governor Hasty. Governor Hasty.
Yes.
Okay, mental health is a really big issue with like our society today. So, how would you address like mental health in like adults and people like in the workforce?
In the workforce?
Yeah.
Well, I think with TennCare expansion, it's going to allow people to get treatment and get medication that they need for it, and that cost shouldn't be a barrier to that. Additionally, we are working on treatment centers specifically for addiction as a mental illness, and we are introducing a bill that implements the hub and spoke system. It's what Vermont did to address their drug addiction problem, and that's sort of what we'll be doing, where you have larger treatment centers and then smaller check-in points in more rural areas.
Governor Hasty. Governor Hasty.
Yes.
This is a little bit more of a personal question, but as your role as governor, which political leader do you hope to embody?
Which political leader do I hope to embody? That's a tough one. The political leader that I admire most is Marquis Lafayette, because of his love for democracy. He came to this country from France because he knew that he had a shot to create the first modern democracy and to sort of realize what was at that point just a dream of the Enlightenment. And he succeeded. He helped us, win the Revolutionary War, and then he went to France and did the same thing. And throughout all that, he was offered the position of dictator of France many times, and he kept turning it down. He even took a prison sentence at one point for not choosing power over what was right. So I think he's who I really want to embody.
Governor Hasty. Governor Hasty.
Yes.
There has recently been a lot of speculation regarding the arming of teachers to help defer gun violence in schools. What are your thoughts on this and the idea of such a bill? If such a bill were passed by the legislature?
No, I would not entertain that because in the school I go to, we're an urban school and we have a lot of students. We have 1,500 students in a very populated area, and you can ask any teacher in my school, have they had their phone, their wallet, their keys stolen, even in a secure location, even from something that was locked up, even from their car, even from something that they said, there's no way that this will be stolen. Now, if that was a gun, I hate to think what would happen. And even if it's on their person, it can be stolen. And just having more guns in the school just increases the likelihood that someone will take that gun or that there will be more gun violence. I don't think that more guns are the solution. Also, our teachers are educators by trade. That's what they went to college for. That's what their career is. I don't think asking them to be bodyguards is appropriate at all. And I think that that would put an unnecessary burden on someone who has a hard enough job already.
Governor Hasty. Governor Hasty.
I'll take one more question. Yes.
There are several bills being proposed that address Tennessee's opioid crisis, drug addiction, and rehab problems. What are your thoughts on this, and what kind of legislation addressing these problems would you ultimately like to see passed by the legislature?
So one of the important ones that I think we should get is there are two. One is decreasing communication between pharmaceutical companies and doctors, because there's a huge stake for pharmaceutical companies advertising their product to doctors, and they can be very persuasive. And that product, an opioid, might not be the best option. That might be harmful or addictive. And I think it creates a bad influence, and we want doctors to be independent and only focus on hard scientific knowledge of these drugs and not what the company wants them to think. So that's one. And then the other one is an act to restrict the consecutive prescription of opioids, because right now there's a cap on how many you can get at once, so that you can't just go in and get 200 pills and then sell them or use them all at once. You have to get a smaller amount, but consecutive prescriptions are allowed. And in East Tennessee, there are 3 times as many prescriptions as there are people. So I think it's a really big issue, and it's clearly being way overprescribed. So that's the other one. And finally, our GovCat bill addressing this is, like I said, the hub and spoke system for treatment centers. We're going to use existing infrastructure for health and modify that to be able to handle the opioid crisis.